up, everyone? Welcome to Unmasked, where things are discovered, uncovered, brought to the light, and made known. I'm your host, Lamar Barrett, coming live to you from PG County, Maryland. If you're interested in finding out about the untold stories of being a college basketball coach, this is the show for you. Being a former assistant men's college basketball coach for 16 years, there are so many untold stories behind the scenes in the life of a college basketball coach. Now, let's unmask them. Today's guest is a longtime assistant coach, and we say longtime in this business. Anytime you get over 10 years, you become a longtime assistant. A future head coach in this business. I always thought he was a great basketball mind. He kind of actually interviewed, or he was on job training for at least 4 games when he was at Mount St. Mary's a few years ago. So, he ended up, he did a good job, with things that was going on there. So I think he's definitely going to be a future head coach in this business. And he's an Alexandria, Virginia native, Matt Henry. Now, a little bit about Matt before we bring him on. Matt, graduated from Trinity down in Texas in 2001. But even while he was there, he began as a student assistant coach. So at a Division III level, we all know a student assistant coach means you're working. Like he's doing part-time work, or doing scouting reports, and he's in practice most of the days, and I'm gonna say almost every day. So he was getting full training as a sophomore in college until his senior year. He was from 2001 to 2004, he was a part-time assistant, staying on at Trinity University, and then he goes to Georgetown University from 2004 to 2010, an administrative role as a director of basketball ops. So we talking about it off air. 2 years later, he's in the Final Four, which is unbelievable after leaving a Division III program. And then he goes to Mount St. Mary's with a man that he worked with at Georgetown, Rob Burke. He was there for 2 years. In those 2 years, they started to build a program. And then, Matt was named the acting head coach for the last 4 games of the season, like I previously mentioned. And then he decided after that year, they decided to add a new coach to Mount St. Mary's. Matt took a year off and he did some scouting, so he worked on himself as a professional. And then a year later, he goes to St. Peter's, where he spent 5 seasons with John Dunn. They did a terrific job. 2018, they ended up getting the job at Marist, and he spent all of 3.5 months up in Poughkeepsie, New York. And then before coming back to, the Baltimore area, the DMV area to coach, where he's presently now at UMBC. And I want to say welcome to the show to a good friend of mine, Matt Henry.
Lamar, thank you very much for having me. I've been watching these, and it's fun to be on with you and get a chance to talk about hoops and my story.
Well, I'm going to say this, Matt. You know what? Let's, jump right into it, because I've always followed you, even when you're Georgetown days, just seeing you. But let's jump right into it, man. Let's get unmasked. We all know, now you go from, you were an assistant early, so you kind of got some of that early when you were at Division III level. But now you go to Georgetown, but now for the first time you're on the road, or, you become a full-time assistant at Division I level. I'm going to mention that one. There's no handbook to being a college coach. Tell me about your first day, the first week, first month, after things are done with human resources or orientation, especially when no one gives you direction. And you can go back to any one of those places, whether it was Trinity, whether it was Georgetown, whether it was, even at Mount St. Mary's. You could talk about those because you all with 3 different types of positions, and I'm sure people want to hear your story. So what was that like?
Yeah, 3 different places and 3 very different on-the-job trainings for sure. I'll just start with, at Trinity was a little bit seamless because I'd worked as a student assistant, and then I graduated and I left for a couple months, and then the assistant left, and I came back. And I'd gone to school there. I knew the players. And really all of my job to do was just like to kind of recruit and coach on the floor. Like my boss had been a head coach for a long time, and because I was part-time and also 22, like I didn't have much budget responsibility or like organizing travel, that stuff. It was just, recruit. And I'd had some, when I was younger, I had the guy assistants who I'd worked with were really good. So I'd learned from them. So that transition was pretty easy. The hardest part about that one was I was working other jobs, trying to make some money. My first year, I made $2,000 as an assistant at Trinity. So I had to work at a golf course to make some more money. I was really fortunate. I had some family support. So, but I think the big kind of learning on the fly was the next job, my first full-time job when I was at Georgetown. And I got the job because I said to Coach Thompson, I said, hey, like, you probably got a million people trying to get on your staff, which was true, right? And then I said, you probably also have a million things you're trying to do. The last thing in the world you want to worry about is camp, right? How are you going to do camp? Well, you got, and I'd actually worked as a Division III assistant coach. I'd worked at Princeton camp a few times. So I knew how Coach Thompson had run his camp and how he wanted it and kind of the general kind of structure. And I said to him, I'm part-time at Trinity. I'll run your camp for you, even this summer. And I used that to get a foot in the door. So I wasn't through HR at that point, but he hired me as like a temp worker to run camp, which seemed like a great idea at the time. It's like anything to get your foot in the door, right? But it turns out like running a camp from scratch is really hard, especially like we didn't have the infrastructure at that point of like managers or GAs or like, it was just me, literally just me at a new institution trying to figure out, hey, camp's in 7 weeks. We have no campers, no staff, and figure it out. So when you talk about like not having a guidebook or any guidance, like that was pretty intense. And then maybe 2 weeks before camp started, Coach Thompson called me into his office and said, hey, I'm gonna hire you full time. I don't know what that job's gonna be. I don't know, what your title is gonna be, but you've got a full-time job. So don't worry about it. Just, you're doing great. Camp's gonna be fine. So we got through that and then just, kept learning. The one thing I think that I would say to any coach, and I know you've had a lot of Division I people, but some others have had Division III backgrounds that you've had on, like Marlon Guild and JD Byers and Mike Fairley, friends of mine. When you're an assistant at Division III, you have to do everything, right? So like, as I kind of got more into that role after the initial time, like I was new at Trinity, I just recruited and have to do much. Well, then as it went on, it was like, well, the scorebook's got to be out for a game and set up the camera and who's going to record for the game and all these different things that happen. So when I got to director of basketball operations at Georgetown, like as that season was getting ready, like I had this checklist of things you had to do. And essentially it was like, no, there's an assistant AD for that. Oh, no, there's a facilities guy for that. And you don't have to worry about getting table workers at the Verizon Center. And I was like, oh, really? Oh, that's awesome. Because like it just, and that's not to say the job was easier. But what Division I allows you to do at that level, at the Big East level, compared to where I was coming from Division III, is that you don't have to do as many things, but the depth then of what you're doing is greater, right? If you're like doing the video stuff, instead of just getting like 3 or 4 games, like you got to get every game, because you're not having to do so many things because there's all the support staff. And that was a big part of my learning experience there at Georgetown.
Awesome, man. Awesome. And then we know this, recruiting, lifeline of college athletics. You had an early taste, so you knew about that a little bit. But we all know that you got to get good players. You got to get good people if you want to be successful. What was your best and worst recruiting story?
Yeah, I mean, like so many of the guests you've had, it's they're all the best and kind of worst in different ways. I would say like the related to kind of learning on the fly is that when I was at Georgetown, right, we had people that like kind of handle all the academic stuff, right? You just hand them the transcript and like, are they gonna be eligible or not? What do they need to get or not? And we got the job at Mount St. Mary's in May and had a bunch of scholarships to give out. It was pretty late. It wasn't like Final Four time. It was like mid-May. And we had to like sign a class and I was the first assistant hired. One of the advice I would give to people is like, if a new staff is coming together, and you have the opportunity to not be the first assistant in with the head coach, you want to try and do that because there's so much stuff going on. Like, you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, if you can be third guy on the staff, like, you want to try and do that because the first guy in, it's just you and the head coach. There's a lot of stuff going on. You're trying to get to know your new players, get to know how to do business in a new institution. You got to fill scholarships. You got to keep kids on the team. Like, it just, you got your own family stuff to worry about. It's a lot. So I was first guy in, and we had to sign some guys, and we got a really good player who ended up being an all-conference player. He's still playing professionally right now. You know, I don't know, this is 10 years later. And we get a call in July recruiting a couple months later, and our compliance person was thinking like the kid wasn't going to be eligible. There was some like technicality, and it ended up getting worked out. But for like a couple days in July, we're out trying to work on that next class. Like the compliance person's telling us, well, did you go through the transcript? It's like, yeah, I did. But like, I hadn't really done that at all because at Georgetown, somebody did it for us. So like I'd missed some little technical glitch that ended up being cleared up. Like they got it squared away with the school district down there. But for like 5 days, we thought the best kid we had coming in was going to be ineligible, which is kind of a scary thing. I don't know if that's my best or worst. It ended up happy. He ended up being eligible. But it just shows like the learning you have to do to your initial question is it's hard and you're not prepared for it, right? You like when you're thinking about being a college Division I coach, like you're like watching film, you're watching games, you're talking, you're evaluating in your head, like you're watching kids play and like, oh, what level is he going to be? And then maybe a year or two later, you're like, oh, I was right about him or I was wrong about him. You're not like practicing breaking down transcripts to see if they have the 16 cores and the 10-7, and at that point it wasn't 16 cores, but whatever it was, right? And you know, I was thinking like another direction in this, maybe like best worst recruiting stories. Like we spend so much time like in this recruiting, like traveling, moving, like you have to go places, right? Like any person in business, right? Like it's like seems very like luxurious, like oh, you get to fly and stay in hotels, it's so great, right? But when you travel that much, there's going to be snafus. And this was just even on a couple years ago. It was like I was at a recruiting event in Jersey, so staying at home, and I'd driven up to a gym in Central Jersey. I think it was a Rob Engelman event, and one of Zach Spiker from Drexel, who I know, is talking, and he's like, when do I have to leave? I got to catch an Uber to go to Newark Airport. And this is like an hour. We're in Central Jersey. It's like an hour 15 from Newark Airport. I'm like, oh, you're flying out? He's like, yeah, I'm going to Greece. I got to go see a kid. I'm like, oh, cool. I drive right by Newark Airport on my way home. What time are you trying to leave? Like, yeah, no, I can just drop you off. So we pull out and we pull onto the Jersey Turnpike, and like we're on the Jersey Turnpike for not even a quarter of a mile, and like a big piece of metal falls off a truck in front of us, like bounces 3 times, ends up underneath my car, and like thump, thump, thump. And like my brake line has been cut, and one of my tires is ruptured. So we pull over, and like the truck's in front starts to pull over like it's going to help, and then it just takes off. This is Jersey. Nobody cares. And we're there on the side of the turnpike with just like cars flying by, and this dude's got like an international flight, and I'm trying to get him to the airport just to be a good Samaritan. And now we're like trying to change a tire on the side of a road, calling AAA to like figure out, can I drive on this? Like we get the tire changed with some help from a AAA guy. And then it turns out he looks at it's just your brake. Like you're going to be able to drive, but so I lost my power brake. So I'm driving down the turnpike going like 35, 40 on a donut, trying to get the dude to Newark. And like to brake, like I got to stop early. Like, and again, like the brakes work, but if you haven't used it, like, you know, none of us have used cars without power brakes in a long time. Like it takes a minute. It's not just like, hey, you stop anymore. So, you know, it just, when you're on the road, things happen. And sometimes, you know, you don't have to be involved in airplane or significant travel. I was an hour from home and, you know, changing a flat tire with a head coach on the side of a road. Head coach, it wasn't even my head coach. That's what I get for trying to do the right thing, right?
That's an awesome story. That's better than like you talk about recruits sometime. That's a story for you right there. Like,
Right,
guess
and that's
because
what I
I
was
have.
thinking. Right, we've all got stories like the one that got away or the one you got, and which it's like there's this other element of recruiting where it's like you're always on the road, and it's either like winter where it's like a mess with travel, or it's like during the summer where there's like summer traffic and all the different things that come with traveling in the summer. So I tried to take it in a different direction for you.
I love it. I love it. What, we all know that this business, man, is a lot of time and that you have to give up. People don't realize. I love it when people always ask, so, what do you do in the off season? Off season, there is no off season. But what did you have to give up achieving your current level of success?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you give up so much, right? And the number one thing is you just like you sacrifice like the social stuff, whether it's like family events, family reunions, weddings. Like if somebody gets married in July, I'm just like, yeah, that ain't happening, right? Or if somebody gets married, like if a friend of mine's getting married from like October until through April, I'm like, yeah, I guess you just didn't want me to be there very, very much, huh? If you're doing it then, like you should know the deal at this point. I've been doing it almost 20 years. Because you're not, you got your work, and then like there's certain family stuff you can't sacrifice. So then what's going to get squeezed out is the other stuff. And I think probably another, like I was dating a woman in DC when I was first working at Georgetown, and she asked me, she's like, well, what are your hobbies? And I was like, I mean, I don't know, like I work, and then like, I hang out with you sometimes, right? Does that count? And I was like, well, I don't know. I like to read the newspaper. And like, she's like, that's not a hobby. That's just something people do. Like you're like, what are you interested in? And I was like, nah, that's it. Right. And I think that's one of the things you kind of have to give up. And is like, there's not a lot of time for extra stuff, right? Like I don't play the piano or like, whatever. It's just like, that's it, and it's hard, but.
You're 100% right, man. You just don't have the extra time. Social life you throw that out the window. Like, I totally agree with you.
And I would say just on that, like also it's like, it's not just, it's all you want to throw that stuff out the window, right? Like if you love it, like to do this and like to, as much as it takes out of you, you're kind of content with throwing some of the social stuff out. The family stuff is hard. That's different. But like, like that's, I would rather watch film than like go to a movie, right? Like by myself, or like I just like, or hang out, like, like I love to spend time with friends, but like I also really, really like basketball, right? It's kind of sick, but you gain some from it too.
So true. We scouting reports, because we all know this. Like, you can always tell. The assistant coach has a little bit more energy when he's on the sideline when it's his scout. He's up and down, he's screaming, he's yelling out plays, he's pissed off when the player doesn't do what they talked about in the scout report 3 or 4 times, and so like you try to figure out like, okay, how do you get to these kids? But then you give the scout report, and like it's one of those times when you tell your coach, like, yo, he's made 2 out of his last 33s. He's really not shooting the ball well. But then he plays against you and knocks down 3 or 4 threes. Coach looking at you, not a good shooter, huh? So what was your best and worst scouting report?
Well, the one thing that comes to mind is always like a fun one is just when I was at Georgetown, it must have been 2000. It was 08, 09 or 09, 10. I mean, I'm old enough now where the years is really hard to distinguish, but we had a good team. We had a really talented team. We had Chris Wright and Greg Monroe and Austin Freeman and Jason Clark. I mean, we were good, but we were going playing UConn. They were number 1 in the country in Hartford. And I think it was the first Big East game. So like it's, they're number 1 in the country. It's a chance to, you want to get off to a good start. You're going on the road. It's a hard game. And I used to, in kind of the role I was in, would work with the assistants on the film stuff. did a lot of the film, and watching the film with UConn, you know, Coach Calhoun had been there for however long, and I don't think it's a secret. Like, it wasn't necessarily anything revolutionary they did. He was just like really good. These guys played hard. They had great players. They're really talented. They'd crush in the glass. They'd run. And watching something like, we played a little bit of zone, and when people would go zone against them, like in the game, they would always run the same 2 plays to start, like every time, and kind of noticed it. And we talked to the staff, and I said to Coach, like, I think if we just, like, I don't know, man, like, we match up in a certain way, like, and so we played a man till like maybe 10 minutes left in the game. And we were like up, but like hanging on. It was one of those, like, you're on the road and you're playing well, but like you're up 3-7 the whole time, but it's hard. It's a grind, and you're just hanging on. And right at that middle of the second half stretch, we go zone. It's starting to get away. Like, they were starting to get comfortable against our man, and they were so good and so big and athletic. And we go zone, and we told our guys, like, here's what we're going to run first. Here's what we're going to run second. Here's what we're going to do. Like, we're going to match up to it. Like, go to our kind of matchup zone. So show 2-3. In the first possession, they do exactly what we say. And I think it was Jerome Dyson just like throws a skip pass, like, out of bounds when stuff wasn't there. Like, because they were so like used to, like, and they were really good at the 2 things they did. They would put Stanley Robinson in the middle and throw it to him. He was like 6'10", small forward, big target, and then throw it to the beat or somebody, you know, they have this big, long guys. And the next play, they do like the second one, and we're on it. They don't have anything, and they ended up like a late shot clock heave. Like, they just kind of melted down. And it gave us like the energy, and we kind of stayed in it and just mucked it up the rest of the game. We ended up winning. It was a huge win. And remember, like, the guys in the locker room afterwards being like, especially, it was some new guys, some younger guys being like, yo, we knew exactly what was coming. And just like going through that and beating the #1 team in the country on the road, and like figuring out the puzzle as coaches, and then putting that puzzle, like giving it to the guys and having them like get it, understand it, and execute it. That's just a lot of fun, right? And like, that's kind of like, it's one of the games within the game, is like when you figure out something that's going to work and can get your guys to do it, like it's awesome. And it's like when the competitiveness that we all have as coaches, right, really comes out, you know, and it's fulfilling, right? It's the way you can't get on the court, but you can get in there and really impact it in that moment. I don't know if I have a bad one. I mean, like, I don't know, like the bad ones you just forget about, right? Like, we all times where it's like you say a kid can't shoot and he makes a couple of threes, but like there's too many of those where like I want to remember any in particular. That's usually how it goes, though, right? Like, the kid can't shoot and he makes 2 threes, and the head coach and the players look at you like, what the.
Yeah, because you can't make that sin of, like, you can't say, well, he can't shoot, because the kid's really like, well, I'm going to just play off of him. And
right.
Like, no,
it's like, right.
still
It's like
a Division I college basketball player.
Right. And I didn't say he never makes it. It's just like, well, that's what we're willing to give up. Right. And it's
so true. Matt, what's been your biggest challenge that you think you've experienced since you've been in college coaching?
The biggest challenge, it's hard to narrow that, right? Because it's such a hard thing, right? I think a big challenge in coaching, right, that on a macro level is the longer I do this, the more I understand or figure out, like when I was young, when I wanted to get in coaching, when I was like in high school or in college, like I had notebooks and notebooks, like school notebooks where I was supposed to be taking notes for classes filled with like X's and O's. And I would watch and like, it was constantly like, what can you do into college? And even like in my 20s and then kind of in your 30s, you start to realize like X's and O's put you at a distinct like advantage or disadvantage, right? Like you can help your team or hurt your team. You can, without a question. But like way more important and way more fulfilling is like understanding that like how important it is to be able to get the kids to be unselfish, to give their all, to be resilient from failure, whether it's on the court or off the court, and coaching that mental side of it. And that's a big challenge, I think, right? Because like when you're young, you just think like, oh, well, they'll just, that stuff is less important. And as you get older, it's like transitioning and getting the point to understand. And then, right, so understanding that is a challenge. Then executing that is even that much more of a challenge, right? Because like if any of us could just like make the dude play hard all the time or make the guy believe in himself all the time, the game would be easy, right? But like that challenge of constantly figuring out with each different guy, like, hey, how do I figure out how to get to him? How do I figure out how to get to him? All right, well, this worked with a player 4 years ago. He's similar. Oh, it turns out it didn't work at all, right? It's like maybe they weren't similar at all. It just, right? The X's and O's are pretty static. Like the game changes and adjusts, but not like people do, right? Like the minds of people, everybody's unique, and figuring out how to work with them is certainly like, I think the biggest challenge, like just as in your career.
So good. So great answer, man. I like that. And you've given, what I like is you've given different perspectives of just about basketball. So that's very interesting. Do you ever find that there are things about you that people might misunderstand? What are
they? I'm sure that my players have a lot to say about that. You don't always know how people perceive you. I think that one of the things that like I can come across as being like very serious and stoic. And especially like when you're with a guy, like can come across as being like tough, because I don't have a lot of tolerance for dudes who aren't about it. Like if you're like about basketball and you love it and you're really like working at it, like it's a lot easier for me to unmask myself, right, and kind of let go and let guys know me. But if like if they're conning themselves and they're conning the game, like I just don't have a lot of tolerance for it. So they probably think of me as being like too tough or, just like too serious. But I just don't like dudes that aren't like into it. Because ultimately, like it's hard to win with guys that aren't like, don't really love it, really aren't about it. And so many of us, we all want to be around basketball. But I think that's a big one. It's just like, people probably see, I'm sure kids see me and they're just like, oh, geez, eventually they figure it out, unless they're just like not about it. And then I can be unrelenting, unfortunately.
I would say you're not as serious as what you look. I think you have a very humorous side, especially when people get to know you. That's what people don't know. Like you're very funny as well, and especially like the people that know you, they do. You are that.
Like when it's related, right? Like just other coaches and stuff. Like I don't let people in super easy, right? And they do, and then like I'm probably walking around with the glasses on. I can look a little more serious, right? A little bit dorkier, but I like to think I amuse myself at least, and sometimes I amuse people I work with or that I'm around.
We all know this. We educate all the time. I mean, it's still basketball is a classroom. I mean, that's what it is. You're always teaching, you're always educating. But like, what do you try to teach your players besides basketball?
Yeah, the biggest one is I think that how you handle stuff when it doesn't go well, right? Because like it's when you're 18 to 22, you don't realize how often it's not going to go well. Even when you've experienced that, there's this like idea that like that life is going to be fair in some way, or you're going to get like, if you work really hard, you're going to get exactly what you want out of it. And the example I like to use, like related to that when you're trying to teach that, is like my career, right? It's not like when you're just starting, you think it's going to be linear. Like you think it's just going to be like, hey, I was a Division III assistant part-time, then I'm director of basketball operations at Georgetown, and then we're like in the Final Four, I'm on my way. And it like rarely is it that simple, right? It turns out I wasn't on like an 8-year track to be Dean Smith. Like it's a little more complicated than that. And I think that, using those experiences, whether it's of like your career, playing, just living, right? Being 41 years old, like I am now, like you can paint, it's like help these guys understand, like it's not your 4-year college career is not going to be linear. It's just not going to go up and up. Oh, well, freshman year was this, and it's going to be rocky. And if you're able to zoom out, right, from like 10,000 feet, well, that line is going to look a lot more clearer up. But when you zoom in and you're in that moment, it's like up and down. But if you work hard, if you don't give in, right, if you're honest with yourself and those around you, over that time, it's going to go up. It'll get better. But it's not going to be like instant gratification. It's not going to work out exactly how you want. And it's okay, because it's, you know what, it's going to be a lot more fulfilling when it does work out. It's hard to know that at 41, let alone when you're 18 to 22 years old and you haven't, and especially like when you're as talented as so many of these kids are that we coach, right? They're Division I for a reason. Like there haven't been a lot of basketball setbacks. They may think in their head, well, like everybody doubted me. Like, well, no, not really. You had 10 Division I offers. I don't think that many people doubted you. You've been on varsity since you were sophomore year, freshman year. Like it's been pretty easy. And then generally like in college, they realize it gets a little bit harder.
So true, man. What are your best and worst memories in coaching?
I like every season when it ends and like losses are oftentimes the worst memories. Let's go to the best. I'm gonna tell a funny story for the worst, and I don't know if it totally applies, but it's too good not to tell. The best, like one, there's like individual best, right? And like I think I tell people like why I coach is because I coach to see individuals have like great individual performances within the collective success. And you see a guy like overcome something or do something he's been unable to do or he struggled with in an individual game and have a great performance. That might be like the dude who's not tough enough and won't take a charge, takes a huge charge. Or it might be the dude that has been missing free throws, makes 2 clutch free throws, right? Or it might be the dude who like worked on a post move with you like 4 weeks earlier, and all of a sudden that post move shows up in a game and a big and one. Within the collective success, getting a win, like those are like the small, the micro moments. And there's so many of those, right, with each individual player. But like I can't, like making the Final Four in 2007 at Georgetown was like incredible. And again, like I mean, you think it's like, oh man, I was 28, I think at the time. Like I was young, and it's like 30 year in Division I, 6th year out of college, and like, oh, Final Four, yeah, this is how it goes, right? But it was a culmination of so many things to that point in my life. One was like my parents have a picture of me wearing a Georgetown Hoyas sweatshirt when I was like 10 years old, because I was like a Georgetown fan growing up in the DC area. So I'd gone away for college, and I come back and I get a job at Georgetown, a full-time job. I'd been part-time in Division III. And I get a full-time job at Georgetown, where Coach Thompson III, who's like running Princeton offense, which I've been like all into in high school and college. And my family's around, and just getting the job was amazing. And then in our 3rd year, like we get the job, we're just trying to like figure out how are we not going to get fired, right? How are we going to keep this job? And the first year we make the NIT, and then the next year we make the Sweet 16, and the next year we win the Big East regular season. We win the Big East tournament. We go to the Final Four, and we beat Carolina in the regional finals. And just like that whole, like just winning that game, and like all of a sudden, like getting to the Final Four, which was like the moment, right, of college basketball, of non-NBA basketball in America, was just incredible. And that was the best one by far. And unfortunately, we didn't play well in the national semifinal. But I remember on my way home from that, we're on the flight, and like for the first time in 4 months, there's not anything pressing you have to do. And just, I took some time and I wrote a letter to my parents, just thanking them, because I wouldn't have been in that position if they hadn't helped me with my education, if they hadn't helped me pay for my health care when I was a part-time Division III assistant coach, and just things like that. Like, that was the best for sure. Being able to share that with them was awesome. My worst, so I don't know how else to get this in, but I have to tell the story. It's so good. So we We get fired at Mount St. Mary's, my second year. Coach Burke resigns. It didn't work out. I'm unemployed for a year. And it was really, really hard not being around a team. And I found some ways, like I did a lot of different basketball stuff that year. I actually had, my wife had a really good job in Maryland, so we didn't move. I went to games. I kind of scouted. I helped out with some AAU stuff. I worked some kids out. I ran a camp. I did a lot of different things. And I thought I wasn't going to get another job after being out 15 months. And kind of the last minute of that next job cycle, 15 months after we left Mount St. Mary's, I get offered the job at St. Peter's. Excited. It's going to be awesome. That was like in June. So I start like July, summer school, recruiting, and I'm kind of driving back and forth from Maryland to Jersey. And in beginning of August, we're still in summer school. My wife comes up on a Friday to look at some apartments, and we find a place in Jersey City, like on the exact same street, like, but a mile down the road from where the gym is. Great. Like, she likes it. We figured out, we put a deposit down, and we were flying out of New Jersey that evening, that afternoon, to go to California for a friend's wedding. Sometimes you can get weddings in August. So we go to this wedding for the weekend. I fly back on a red eye Sunday night. And I get to the office early. I only been working there for a month, and I'm sitting at my desk, and 9:15 on a Monday morning in August. Not much going on a college campus. And we get a little, like, an email, and it says, hey, there's been, a reported criminal gun activity in lot C. Please, like, it wasn't shelter in place, but it was like, stay in your offices. Don't go anywhere. I've been working there for a month, so I don't, I'm in Jersey City. I finally gotten a job. I don't, Jersey City has this bad reputation that some of it was warranted at one point, but it's a very nice place in a lot of different ways, whether it's working class neighborhoods, higher end neighborhoods. It's great. But I didn't know. And I see this, I'm like, well, that's lot C. I wonder where that is. So I like pull up a campus map. And if you've been to St. Peter's, like, there's not much of a campus, right? It's 2 city blocks. But I pull up a map. I'm like, where's lot C? I'm like, oh, that's where I parked this morning. Okay, that's weird. And then, like, you get another email. It's like, yeah, so a security, an employee was shot in lot C at 9:15. I'm like, I parked there like 8:45 this morning. So I'm thinking, like, what on earth have I gotten myself into? And then, like, 10 minutes later, my boss, Coach Dunn, comes up, and he's like, yo, you'll never believe it. He pulled into the parking lot that morning, and he sees, like, the baseball coach in his rearview mirror, like, yelling, like, screaming. And he hops out, and he's like, yo, you all right? And he's like, I just got shot. And so at 9:15 in the morning on a Monday morning, in the office, in the parking lot that's attached to the gym where I now work, the baseball coach got shot in a reported, like, attempted carjacking. And keep in mind, like, on Friday, 3 days earlier, I signed a lease not a mile down the street, literally on the same road. And I'm thinking, like, what on earth have I gotten myself into? Like, how are you supposed to recruit anybody to a school? Oh, is the deal. The parents always ask, well, is it safe around here? Like, oh yeah, no, we haven't. It's been 7 days since our last shooting in the gym. So I would say that was one of the worst coaching moments, where just, like, you're trying to, like, I'm taking my wife away from a good job, moving to a new place because I want basketball so bad, and you want to do it. And then all of a sudden you realize, like, man, there's people getting shot at 9 in the morning on a Monday. And there ended up being, it's New York City. Like, there ended up being, like, New York City, like, news trucks outside the facility. I had to call my wife, like, hey, just in case you see there was, like, a shooting at St. Peter's, it wasn't me, either victim or perpetrator. Like, I'm good, so don't worry about it. We're fine. It was kind of one of those only at St. Peter's moments, for sure.
2 great stories. One, writing the letter, and then the baseball coach yelling I got shot. Wow.
Yeah, it was.
Those are two.
I'm actually like some of it. I'll give more of it on the when you do the Too Hot for YouTube extended cuts DVD of Unmasked. I'll give you some more on that whole thing. But that's one of the unmasked stories I can give you, right?
I love it. I love it, man.
Athletic department member getting shot.
Wow, I love it. I'm gonna ask you this: what was the most stressful situation you have faced? Because you talked about, it may tie in. You talked about just being a year out, but like, what's the most stressful situation you think you faced?
Yeah, I mean that year was terrible. And it was one of those things. If I'd have known how it was going to work out, like now, it would have been great. Because it's like, oh, well, I can have a normal Thanksgiving. Okay. If I'm just one of those, like, great. I can have a normal Christmas, just one, great. You treat it like a sabbatical year would have been great. But it's so hard to get back in. And it's so hard. People don't understand. Like, you get, like, you know, friends being like, oh, who aren't in basketball, who are like, oh, I saw that, like, a North Carolina assistant got a head coaching job at somewhere else. Maybe you could call up North Carolina. I'm like, it doesn't work like that. Like, it's just there's only 350, then one, I think 353 jobs in Division One. Economy's good, there's going to be 353. The economy's bad, there's going to be 353. Although this bad economy may challenge that a little bit, but so it's really hard when you don't know you're going to get back in. It's not a guarantee. And that was really, really stressful because you're used to being around one, you want to do it. It's fun. It's your livelihood. And also, like, you're used to being around a team and around kids and helping people and around a group. And, like, it's hard to explain when you're part of a team and then you're not. And for people who aren't into that, right, aren't into that experience, they don't kind of understand the withdrawal, and how your internal calendar is so linked to the basketball season, right? It's like, well, New Year's Day is January 1st for people, but in many ways you could, ours is, I don't know, it could be July 1 when July recruiting starts. It could be like the start of classes in the fall. It could be start of practice, but it's not January 1. Like, that's not how we calculate our calendar. So when you have that taken away and all of a sudden you're put more on like a civilian calendar, it's hard and it's stressful because you don't know if you're going to get back in. So it was really a challenge for me.
So true. And like, this was the first year I was away from basketball in 22 years. And from, just from basketball, I was doing the scouting, but sure. You're right. It's the one question that people always ask is, do you miss it? And I'm like, I don't miss the basketball part per se. You miss the players. You like being around them, just having that constant communication, being a part of their life. I think that's the stuff that we miss. I mean, the basketball stuff, that's what we've been doing all our lives. So that becomes like just second nature, but it's just the relationships and things like that you build, and just seeing kids grow. That's the stuff that you miss more than this.
Yeah. And just being around young people keeps you young, right? Like, you can't help it. It keeps you, I mean, again, I'm sure my kids would just die laughing at this, but like, it keeps you hip. I don't think of me as hip, but like, I'd be really not hip if I weren't like around them. And it gives you an energy, and a purpose. And it is. And when you see that, like, it gives you, when that's what you do, right? Seeing them improve or seeing them grow, like and seeing them perform and like knowing what it took to get to that performance, it's hard to replace that. You don't get it in other jobs. I don't think I've never had another one, but
I agree with you 100% on that. Speaking of kids, and it could be an adult, but like, what is the strangest thing a player has done outside of the basketball court?
I'm trying to, that's hard because I'm trying to think through again, like some of these you block out of your head, because they're so insane. And this is like there's not gonna be much levity in this, but I had a kid at a job, I don't even want to get into what job it was, who was clearly having mental health issues. And and he was at a point, and if you kind of follow kind of some of this stuff, like the general, like the age for some breaks with mental health stuff is so often like in that 17, 18 to 25 range. And he was clearly going through some stuff. And I don't even know if there was one thing off the court that like was worse than the next, but it was like, by all accounts, he was not acting like he had been or who he had been for the first however long, many years of his life. And it was really like kind of sad to see him go through that and then not be able to help. Right. It's just, and I think I've heard other people kind of talk about, they've asked me, hey, remember you were kind of talking about the situation. How did you guys resolve it? Because I think in coaching, and it's mental health stuff is way more on the forefront now than it was when you and I started. But even still, like there's not a lot of handbook for like a kid who just like, he really breaks from what his normal behavior is. I'm not talking about like just depression or anxiety, and not to minimize those things because those are significant, but like you couldn't get to him. And it was really complicated and hard, and just, it was sad because it's lost potential, right? And it's not his fault, not anybody's fault, but it was lost potential on and off the court. And certainly, more important, being off the court for his life. So no like great individual story there, but just like it's out there. And if you work with 18 to 22 year olds, you're going to see that at some point where they're just kids aren't doing well. And you can't reel them back in, and it's hard.
Now you've worked for some, pretty good guys like, Coach Odom, John Don. You had, you were with Rob Burt for a couple of years, JT3. And I don't change it how I've gone along because it's kind of hard when you ask this question. But if you've taken something from those guys or you've seen things in college athletics, when it's time for you, and I'm saying this, I think this is going to happen. When it's time for you to get your program, like, what do you expect from, administration or the athletic administration, the administration? What would you want them to do or be a part of for your program?
Yeah. I think when it comes from what do you want from an administrative standpoint, I think, I think that somebody said this to me one time. It's like, you want to be partners, right? You want to be equal partners. And you hear about this a little bit more increasingly, like the NBA level, where people talk about like, general manager and a head coach, and like you want them on the same page, right? On the same time frame. And I think it's similar, like with administration, you want them vested, and when things go poorly, because inevitably in some way something's going to go poorly, right? It's not going to be a fairy tale. It's the same thing we're talking about with our careers, right? They're not just going to be like, oh, we're just keep getting better every year. Like it's going to be rocky at some point. And I think what you would want is you want the response to be, how can I help? Not, hey, why is this happening? Right? Hey, why'd you have a losing season? Hey, how can I help you be better next year? How can I help you get back to where you once were? How can I help? How can we help from an administrative level? And I think there's a lot of that. Like, I mean, as an assistant coach, you're not privy to many of those discussions between head coaches and administrators. But you kind of piece it together, whether what your head coach shares or what an administrator shares. But I think you want somebody who's a partner and who's looking for ways to help, and not kind of like ways to, or just not, who's not just asking questions of like what the problem is, but how can I be part of the solution, right? Because that's what we ask of ourselves, we ask of our players, right? Hey, not why did you miss all these shots? How can I help you make more shots, right? I think something that was along those lines.
Great stuff, man. Great. And this will kind of throw you off a little bit, hopefully. What movie or TV show title best describes your week?
Right now, Daddy Daycare, I think, is the best descriptor for my week. It's been a crazy 3.5 months, and my wife is incredible, and we have some help as well. We have 3 kids under the age of 5. So we got like a lot going on. but it's just kind of this new balancing act of life right now with, and I can't imagine how people do it who have more structure in their jobs, where they have like a kind of, ours is very fluid, right? And there's certain things we can't do, there's certain things we can do. And I have a boss and a staff who are, that I work with who are incredible. My boss, just an understanding of like what he wants from us is just awesome always, but particularly right now. I think so. It's hard for me to even remember a time before it was daddy daycare, to be honest, just because it's been 3.5 months.
That's a great answer, though. What's your favorite word or phrase that you like to use?
I don't know. I don't know how many of them I can say. I think that one of the ones that's like stuck with me lately, and it goes back to maybe something I alluded to earlier about less X's and O's and like kind of the simplicity of some of the stuff is like, I tell our guys, like, you just got to try. Like, you're not even trying. And I think that like, I find myself saying that a lot increasingly over the last few years, where it's like, sometimes it's simple as that. Like, you come out of a loss and you're frustrated and you watch the film. It's like, we're not even trying. Like, so what, like, that's not you. It's not your best. And in a sport that's so complicated, right? And like in how you do it and structurally the X's and O's and how you get people to work together, like oftentimes comes down to like, we went out there and we didn't try very hard. Right. And I find myself kind of just hitting on that, or if we try really hard, we'll probably win. Well, we'll feel good about ourselves, at least at the end. So you got to try, man. Try.
Love it. Love it. Simple. Like you said, simplistic, but it's still so powerful. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
The best piece of advice I've ever been given. That is interesting. At some point, I don't even remember where it was, probably my dad. But it went back to like, I think it was, is making yourself indispensable in your job. And I think that I'm probably not that good at doing it, to be honest, all the time. But just, I think that's a big one. And another kind of, I think this is important to remember, and like, it's maybe lived, sometimes I'll kind of live and figure out. It's about my experience. Like when I tell people all the time about I get so lucky at Georgetown, right? Like I just getting a job from Division III to like being director of basketball operations at like, what was my dream school, right? I get a dream job when you're 25. But I think it was really important, like, is that like, if you get your foot in the door, like a lot of people can do what we do. Right. And access to the job. And I got my foot in the door through like some perseverance and dumb luck. But it's not like it just as important as we think we are as coaches, or our jobs are, and they are important. And as talented as some people are, and so many of us are, right? It's like, it's not rocket science. There's so many people that can do it. And I think that especially in this, and I didn't think it would go in this direction at all, but like when you think about like this moment and kind of the movement going on in this last few weeks about equality and opportunity, is like, there's so many people that'd be really good Division I basketball coaches if they were offered an opportunity. And for a variety of reasons, right, people aren't given that opportunity. And part of it is more just like, it's just really hard. It's 353 times 3. So there's not a lot of jobs. But I think keeping that in your head of like, just all it takes is get your foot in the door, can ground you and remember that like, nobody's that good. None of us are that good, right? Like there are a lot of people that could go and do a great job if they were given the opportunity that I was given, and to not take yourself too seriously and not think you've got all the answers and have it all figured out. So try and ground yourself through that.
So true, man. like I know you're not a self-promoter, but if you had to choose 3 adjectives to describe yourself, what would they be?
Yeah, I actually have those 3 adjectives on my Twitter feed at Coach Matt Henry, and on my website, and on my self-help book. You can buy Venmo me. Right? Isn't that the way we're supposed to do it now? Yeah, I kind of said it earlier. I think like tough, and tough comes in a lot of ways. Like one, like sometimes it can be tough to crack, but also like tough in my standards of how I hold my players, our players and people around me. I think tough, and that can go a lot of different ways, positive and negative. I think caring, I think is one, like, and once you get, especially the players, like once they get past the tough, I think they do ultimately realize that like I can be a pain on them, and I can really ask a lot, but it's only because I really do want them to be as good as they can be. And you want them to see like that moment of like, oh my God, he did that for us in this moment. He overcame. You really care when that happens. And then it's related. It's like thoughtful, right? As I try not to, it's really hard. Try not to be like emotional and reactionary, and like in coaching, there's so much, but you care so much, like the passion comes out. And it's so important, I think, for all of us trying to step back and like just be thoughtful and think and make sure we're getting the moment right. Especially in this world today where it's like Twitter and instant news and all this stuff, like to like slow down and think and be thoughtful and mindful, so that you're not like regretting what you say, and you're also like taking into consideration other people around. I would like to think that I can be thoughtful in that way, mindful.
3 great ones, man. 3 great ones I did. Like what person what person and or event has had the most influence on your life?
Yeah, my parents, I mean, are it's hard to get past that. I mean, one, I've been so fortunate and privileged in the experiences I've had, whether it's with education, with basketball, with life. My mother and my father, I think, they've given me so many opportunities, and they come from kind of different experiences. I mean, my mother's parents went to college, and my father's parents neither went to college. And I think that balance of like having someone who really like had to, what he had in life was not guaranteed, and what he had to work for with my father, and the lessons that come from that are really, really impactful and valuable. As someone who like had a lot given to him, I think it's really important to have that message always in my head. And my mom's experience was different, but she went to a boarding school, and then had parents that could pay for college, and but also just kind of the balance of those 2 experiences has been really meaningful, and hopefully I can stay grounded and have my own children have some level of grounding, that the opportunity they've been given, or hopefully I can give them, is not about them. It's about people before them, and that they have an obligation to achieve and give back. I think those things are important.
Good stuff, man. Like, how has coaching affected your life?
It certainly can't help my blood pressure. Right? It's hard. I mean, it affects it in so many ways, right? It affects the experiences we have, and the travel, and the people we get to work with. I think it's hard, and you kind of got at this earlier, but it's hard to separate your coaching life from your life, right? Your life just kind of becomes coaching, and you have to find ways to balance that with your family and your personal, but they kind of become one. for better or for worse, right? And sometimes that is for better, for sure, and other times that's for worse. But it's hard to separate from like life and coaching. What you know.
Good stuff, man. So I like to end with this question. It's just something I like to do. Knowing what you know now, like what would you tell your young or younger self to prepare for as an assistant coach?
I think the biggest thing is, you know, is that make sure you make time for yourself, and whatever that is for you. And I don't, you know, like that can be different for somebody else. And it might mean make sure you're making time for yourself to read, to call your parents, to work out, exercise regularly, whatever the things are, like the self-care Sunday, right? Like Issa talks about on Insecure, like you got to do it, and you don't have time for a full Sunday like Issa and Molly do. But you got to find time for yourself. And some of that is also like professional development, making sure that like you are preparing yourself for whatever your ultimate goals are, whether it's long-term or short-term. And that's not cheating on your job. It's not cheating on your boss. You just have to find some time. And it's so hard, right? Because we just want to worry about I just want to win the next game. I just want to figure out how we can win this season. I just want to figure out how we can get this player, how I can like get to the, you know, get the scout done and get to the high school game and evaluate this kid because I need to get it. And then you got to find some time. You'll be a better coach for it. You'll be a better employee for it. You'll be better long-term for it. You'll be healthier for it. And again, it comes in a lot of different ways. But I think that to this day, right, it's a work in progress for myself. It's a work in progress for all of us. But I certainly had no sense of that when I was 22, 25, 39. It's hard. It's hard because we get so siloed into what's in front of us with our jobs because we're so competitive and because we want it so badly.
So correct, Matt. So I want to thank you again, Matt, for being a guest on the show and being unmasked. Is there anything you want to leave with the viewers before we go?
No, thank you. This was fun, and I like generally talking about myself is something that pains me to no end. But you've made it you've made it really easy, and it is kind of fun to do this after watching some good friends go through it myself. So thank you for the time and the opportunity.
You're welcome, man, and I'm glad you got on. He was definitely somebody I wanted to get on. Just wanted to get your story out there. Just think you're one of the best in the business, and I just wanted people to see that. Yeah. So I want to thank you viewers for watching another great show. Stay tuned for the next guest as we get them unmasked. See you next time and stay safe.